The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there, and welcome from Ventura, California to today's webinar, sponsored by Novel and hosted by WebAttract, your end-to-end solution provider for informational webinars. I'm Lori Dearman, content producer with WebAttract, and I'll be your moderator as well as one of your hosts for today's session. And in just a moment, I'll be introducing our panel of thought leaders, as today's webinar is about hearing from these experts as they address how to offer more schedule certainty to your customers through a discussion of front-end solutions that enable you to work smarter. Now, we've invited you, along with over 300 professionals from 58 countries and 28 states and provinces, representing a variety of industries, all here to learn best practices on maximizing profit and mitigating project risk through assessing overall project uncertainty, collaborating, and sharing risk across teams and companies, and deciding who owns project reserve, or what we're calling float time. Now, regardless of your industry segment or location, we're confident that you'll find today's webinar of value. Let's go to our first poll for today. Now, coming up on your screen, you should see a question. We'd like to know from you what percentage of your projects were completed late in the past year. I'll give you just a few moments to register your votes before we share them out, and you can see what other folks are saying as well. All right, I'm showing the at 36%, the majority of us are saying 5 to 25% of the projects came in late. Then we've got tie for 19% under 5 in the 26 to 50 range, and 22% of you are saying 51 to 75. Just about 3% are saying over 75. So thank you so much for your input. I know it's nice to know that we're not alone in this. Now, the host of today's webinar is Novel, and before we get started, I'd like to turn it over to Missy Stewart, Marketing Manager at Novel, who'll take just a minute of your time to officially welcome you and express what she hopes you'll get out of today. Missy?
Thank you, Lori, and thank you all for attending today. If you're not familiar with Novel, we provide a web-based application for engineers that integrates technical reference information with analytical and search tools to deliver answers that engineers can trust. I'm excited for Novel to be putting on this webinar, and I wanted to share with you why we're hosting today's event. As the global economy expands, there's continuous pressure on margins, and increasing flexibility and responsiveness is required. Companies that can provide their clients with world-class projects delivered on time and on budget have the competitive advantage. As owners and managers, our goal is to manage our projects to a successful conclusion, but there will always be days when it rains, equipment doesn't show up on time, you face unanticipated technical challenges, new environmental regulations, or you simply don't have sufficient qualified workers to complete all your tasks on schedule. With our users turning to Novel for help with best practices and how-to information that can help keep projects on schedule, we saw the opportunity to pull together an expert panel to provide guidance on this topic. I trust that following this webinar, you'll walk away with a greater understanding of schedule uncertainty, who owns float, and if sharing risk can really work. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their hard work and preparation today, and I'll take it back to you, Lori.
Well, thank you so much, Missy, for setting the stage, and I'm very excited to welcome our 3 industry experts with very diverse backgrounds. Now, all 3 are respected authors with works available on Novel. Let me start by introducing Tom Kendrick, MBA, MSEE, who has nearly 40 years of worldwide project and program management experience. He's currently Program Director for the Project Management Curriculum for UC Berkeley Extension. Tom is an author of 4 project management books, including Identifying and Managing Project Risk. He regularly conducts classes and presentations on program, project, and risk management. Tom has managed projects at Hewlett-Packard, Visa, DuPont, General Electric, and as well as an independent consultant. Tom is a certified PMP and an active leader for the Project Management Institute globally. Tom, welcome to the webinar. How are you today?
Just fine. Thank you, Laurie.
All right. Also joining us today, we have Sydney Levy. In addition to 40 years of experience in the general contracting business in Northeast and Middle Atlantic states regions, Sydney Levy is a seasoned lecturer, instructor, and author with 30 book publications related to engineering, architecture, and construction to his name, as well as dozens of speaking and teaching engagements around the globe. Sydney, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, glad to be here and participate in what I think is going to be a very interesting seminar.
Perfect. And third in our lineup of speakers, we have Todd Williams. Todd has 25 years of worldwide project recovery expertise. He's a professional member of Society for Information Management, Association for Corporate Growth, National Speakers Association, and the Project Management Institute. He's an expert in executive consulting, project rescue, failure prevention, and engaging people in the solution. He's been chosen to speak on his expertise to numerous companies and organizations, including BAE Systems, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, Hewlett-Packard Applied Materials, AMA, Society for Information Management, and APIX. He is author of Rescue the Problem Project and is passionate about removing the wall between the project team and the customer. Todd, so glad to have you join us for today's discussion.
Oh, I'm honored to be here. It's going to be a very good webinar, and I'm very pleased that I'm part of it. Thank you.
All right. Now that we've met our experts for today's presentation, I'd like to let you know that today's presentation is going to take the form of a panel. So each of our speakers will be contributing to each of the 3 topics that we'll be covering. So before we do that, just to be sure that we are all on the same page, I'd like to invite Tom up to take a moment to discuss the definition of float as it relates specifically to today's webinar. Tom?
Thank you, Laurie. One of the things that we wanted to talk about at the very beginning of this was to make sure that everybody on the call here is aware of the concept that we're going to be discussing. There are a couple of definitions of float. Probably the most common is the one that is built into project management as we do critical path analysis. You can see from the picture that's on the slide, some of the activities in a project have flexibility. They can be executed at an early date. They could be executed later with no impact on the overall schedule. And we've labeled that here CPM float, or critical path methodology float. In addition to that, and the definition that we're going to use today is the float that you put at the end of a project. And the float that we build after the expected completion or the hoped for completion of a project, the difference between that date and the committed date that may be in a contract or maybe in another form of commitment that we make for our project, we can refer to that as project float. And that difference is a reserve, and it's often called project reserve or management reserve, scheduled buffer, sometimes it's called. There are many other names. But the idea of this difference between when we hope the project will complete and when we're committed to having it complete, that's the concept that we're going to be discussing here on the call. And with 80% of the projects that are represented by the folks on the call here over the last year, based on the poll, it sounds like building a float that's about the right size, probably a good idea. So with that, I'll turn it back to Lori.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. And let's jump into the first of our topics for today, project schedule uncertainty. And Tom, since we have you on the line, let's start with you. What are your thoughts in this area?
Thank you, Lori. One of the things that often happens at the end of a project is we have schedule problems and things begin to slip and get late. And of course, the scheduling problems are noticeable at the end, but they, for the most part, begin right at the beginning of the project. And this goes back to a number of things. We find that often people spend insufficient time looking at risks and understanding what these schedule exposures might be for a given project. We also have dependencies on things outside our project, deliverables that our activities need, things that we're dependent on, such as good weather and other factors, and we don't spend enough time really delving into the consequences when those dependencies don't come about the way we planned them for. And then the third area that's very big, most project managers will easily admit that they don't estimate as well as they would like to. Imprecision in estimates, particularly for work that's new to a project, and there's always a little of that, or for work where there's high variability. And so digging deeper into the project and understanding it more fundamentally is the best place to start in solving difficult schedule problems that we're going to notice toward the end. And with that, I've turned it over to Todd.
Well, yeah, there's several sources for project schedule uncertainty, but in the number of years that I've been doing project recovery and trying to get projects back running again, I think I focus on three major ones. The first one is lack of project definition. And this is really just not completely understanding what it is that you're going to do and how you're going to do it. We all get kind of optimistic and we jump in and we're going to go try to get something done, and we don't quite spend enough time in that planning phase. So we kind of expect a little bit of a miracle to occur, and so far I haven't seen any of those on any projects I've ever been on. The next big uncertainty area is when we have real, honest to goodness, uncertainty, something that we can't control, something completely out of our control, acts of God, earthquakes, various uncertain weather conditions. I mean, we may know that we're in hurricane season and there could be a hurricane, but we don't know that all of a sudden this big hurricane is going to come through and totally devastate everything. So we do some planning and we can kind of think about some of that other stuff, but we really don't know when those big things are going to happen. And that's one that is just, it's a real killer because we just can't plan for it, period. The last source of the three would be uncertainty because of how we actually plan and our plan variations. And so we could end up with a task, maybe every task varies around whether it's going to be 1 or 2 or 3 days or something like that, and we're used to that. But if we're always trending one direction and things start to drift, or we kind of, oh yeah, well, we'll let that one go because that was just kind of a special case. If we keep doing that and we start losing track of what that variation is and how it's affecting us, then things get out of control. And there are many times whenever people just have that activity duration that just it just moves a little bit too much, and they need to kind of zero in and focus on it better. Just lack of attention. So that's where I see the big three ones. Tom, do you have anything to say about that?
I can't agree more. And in particular, one of the things that we want to do in looking at a project at the plan level, starting at the very beginning, is ask, what are the worst cases here? What have we seen happen on prior projects? What might break the wrong way on this particular piece of work in the project? And if it does, what are the consequences of that? Metrics help with realistically estimating the work. If we have good records on past projects doing similar activities, we want to take full advantage of that. We want to ensure that the projects that we lay out and plan for realistically understand what the duration of the work is likely to be when we actually get in the middle of it. Todd mentioned about external dependencies, particularly those where we really can't anticipate them with any degree of precision, but the environment we work on our projects, other projects that are executing in parallel with ours that may interfere or even help with the work that we're taking on, regulations that we're subject to, again, digging deep into the externals that surround our projects. And then within our own projects, we need to understand better where the dependencies we have on getting material on time, having the right information when we need it, getting decisions from the people that we work for, our managers and the sponsors of our work, as well as the people that need to make decisions outside our organization, our customers and others. And taking all of this into account, the goal of a good project plan should be to aggregate all of this risk information and use that to set the project level reserve or float so that we can be successful with projects that we undertake. So any further thoughts on this, Todd?
Well, I have to really zero in on that last few lines you were saying there on that last bullet, Tom, because it's all about people. You know, whether they're physically in our team or they're external to our team, we have to pull them in as that extended team and be one group of people. We need to dedicate them to their tasks. We need to get them so that they're focused, both physically focused, they're in the spot, they're where they're supposed to be, and they're mentally focused, meaning that we don't have other distractions that are outside, emails and bosses bothering them and other spurious questions coming in. Because the minute we start to focus them and get them kind of pressured into what they're supposed to be doing or focused into what they need to be doing, then we start bringing down the uncertainty very, very quickly. Another area where you can really help out is that you can pull your risks forward. So you can start looking at the standard project management philosophy, bring it forward, get it up front. And I take that one step further. I bring things forward that many other people don't really think should come forward. So maybe I'm pulling things up a little bit and I'm starting to break some of the dependencies, and I start something just a little bit earlier to give me a little more cushion at the end and take the risk that I might have a little bit of rework. Or maybe I increase my cost by doubling up people on certain shifts, and I add more people in the early parts so I can give myself a little bit of room, wiggle room down there further in the project, creating some of the stuff that we kind of call here as float itself. The last thing I probably do is I look at how I can put in buffers and create buffers. Now that goes right back to pulling some of that risk forward and how I work with that. Because as I go in, maybe double up shifts or kind of push some of the dependencies a little bit and take a little bit of risk there, I start creating buffers out further in my project, and I watch those buffers and I try to make sure that I still got that cushion out there so that I can create things. So like the chart here on the table, I've created a bit of a buffer out in the January-February time frame to allot for weather conditions that might change. So those are the three things that I kind of look at to help things out. Now, Sid, you've been pretty quiet here. What do you have to say about this?
Well, I think that the one thing you mentioned, Todd, about earthquakes and, let's say, 8 inches of rain in 3 hours, acts of God, at least in the construction business, that's the one excusable delay called force majeure. So we don't really anticipate that, but if it comes, both owner, contractor, subcontractors realize that these are conditions beyond our control. I think preparing the schedule with all participants inputting, pointing out some potential pitfalls, but not overcompensating for them. It's so easy for a subcontractor to say, well, to do this foundation work will take 15 days, knowing darn well it's only going to take 10. But he's going to tell 15 because when he finishes in 10, he'll look like a hero. So you have to really, it's difficult to assess the schedule uncertainties until you isolate those activities, holding the potential for delays or might contribute to missed completion dates. And the concept of float to cover uncertainties is not a new concept, but it has surely been frequently abused, making people wary when one requests float. So you need to be specific in your reasons for the request. Perhaps if you're in the planning stages and it's a unique project, you might think about another delivery system. In construction, rather than pursue a design, bid, build approach, for example, use design, build, which can shorten the entire design construction timeline by anywhere from 23 to 33% over conventional processes, which is a result of a study done by University of Pennsylvania. Building information modeling, where a virtual building is created in 3 dimensions, allows various design consultants to participate more quickly, speeding up the design and also allowing the project to be fast-tracked, because after the structure has been designed, pitches in with mechanical, electrical, and architectural, the placing of structural steel can be made, and delivery can be speeded up, and fabrication can start much faster. So think about different ways, different delivery systems that you can use to create schedule uncertainty, delivery systems that are proven to be successful in meeting complete schedules. But Any schedule, no matter how simple or complex, requires constant monitoring to ensure that it's on track, or the roadblocks must be dealt with. And I found the best way to do this is to create at least a 2-week look-ahead schedule, or perhaps a 6-week look-ahead schedule, with all participants to the process in attendance. And if there are glitches or if there are delivery problems, then maybe you can switch your schedule around and direct your forces to another area to compensate for the delays that might be incurred by one piece of equipment being delayed by a couple of days. So I think that it is very, very important to constantly look at the schedule, look at what's coming down the road, alert you to situations that require immediate attention and resolution. And now I'm going to kick it back to Laurie.
Thanks so much, Sid. And gentlemen, that was a great discussion on project schedule uncertainty. And folks, if you have questions, please keep them coming, because now we're going to turn our attention to the topic of sharing risk, which I know is a hot topic. And so the question is, can risk be shared effectively? And Todd, I know you have some thoughts on this topic.
Yes, and I know that in prior conversations with the other panelists, that when I put this out there and I just kind of made this bold statement that I've never seen shared risk, I got some pushback pretty quickly. Again, it's part of that bit of me walking into situations that are pretty ugly looking, and things have kind of fallen all apart. And at that point, you got people trying to grab money and pull their money this way and that way, and they're not willing to share anything at that point. It's all a completely different style. So I see it as a fairly contentious situation and very difficult to do. That being said, I think there's a number of methodologies that can actually help you share risk. They kind of get built into that sharing process. Sid's actually talked about one already, and that was design build and taking out the bid in between. So you go design, bid, build is too cumbersome. If I just go straight from design to build, then we do much better at shrinking things down by 20-30%. In my world, I do a lot of stuff in new product development and information technology projects. We use a process called Agile, which is the diagram tries to show here. And that is, what it's doing is it's bringing the people who are going to end up using this thing, the people who are going to buy this thing, the end user, in with the people who are going to build it, to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. So now you've taken away that risk of, well, I threw it over the wall and this person doesn't quite understand what I'm talking about, and you level that out significantly. It's a much better way to minimize your risk and increase cooperation. Tom, are you back online to be able to talk about this a little bit more?
Yes, Todd, and I really do agree with fundamentally what you're saying there. I think that it's very difficult to share risk on a project. The blame, and often when there are problems, there's a lot of that to go around. Most of the blame ends up being in the hands of the project leader and the project team. But that said, there are some ways to share risk that can be built into the contract, and probably the most fundamental way to do that is through incentives and penalties, where if you do manage to end a project early, there are incentives, benefits that the project team, the organization is doing the work, will receive. And of course, if they're late, then there are penalties that end up making their fee less or have other consequences. Another way that can be built into the contract is to have sharing of the risk, so that there are proportionate terms for payment that are based on performance, so that if you're able to do better, you end up with an extra fee, and if you're not able to do better, then you might end up with less. But it's a percentage that's set up based upon how the performance is to be shared. Another place where contracts can help with this is to make sure that changes to the project, and almost every project that I've had anything to do with has ended a little differently than it began. So change is pretty common on most kinds of projects, but how is that dealt with? So specific exemptions for acts of God, or things that are truly well out of the control of anybody on the project, either the performing organization or the customer, that can be accepted so that the consequences of that are borne in a way that's fair to everybody. And then for other changes for which there's a requesting party, then you want to make sure that the consequence of those changes is fully borne by that party. If it's a change that the customer requires, then the timing and the cost consequences of that will be borne by them. And if it's something that was done either by omission or inadequate project work by the project team, then the costs will be borne there. But change is one of those areas that's often not described terribly well in contracts. And then the third area that I think risk sharing is pretty obvious. We uncover risks on projects, we write them down, we evaluate them, do some assessment on them, and then we decide whether there's anything that we can or should do about them. And frequently, mitigating a risk or avoiding it has cost associated with it. And so by discussing and being open and working as a team with the customers that we work with on our projects, we can do a much better job of sharing the costs of lowering those risks that we really do feel could get our project in trouble. All that said, though, sharing risk on a project is almost always going to be heavily balanced on the side of the project team. And so sharing risk on a project can be a little bit like sharing a banana with a gorilla. You're likely to not get the part that you're looking for. So I'd like to kick it over to Sid and collect some of his thoughts.
I think that the old adage, you don't know how I feel until you walk a mile in my shoes, is quite appropriate here, because once the other parties to an agreement are aware of the risks of the other that could be incurred, they're more likely to consider sharing some of that risk. And in fact, AIA, American Institute of Architects, AGC, Associated General Contractors of America, and Lean Construction, in the past 5 to 7 years, have recognized this fact. And their contracts are more flexible when it comes to sharing risks. An AIA contract that's called IPD, Integrated Project Delivery, actually waives claims against each other except for 7 egregious acts ranging from willful misconduct to liens and claims, encumbrances against the project by entities not a party to the agreement. AGC has a consensus docs, which has a collaborative provision in there where owner, architect, contractor, and key subcontractors and suppliers all draw on their knowledge to provide input for cost, quality, and schedule. So there are organizations that have recognized that this business of risk being pushed all on one party is just not reasonable. Another thing that you might think about is if somebody's got to include risk in the project, either the owner or the contractor. So if this is brought to light, and you could possibly put it in the contract in the form of an allowance and have those conditions in which the allowance can be tapped to compensate somebody for risk. If it's not used, then both parties share in it. So there are many ways to look at this. And another I think important thing is this weekly look-ahead meeting and updating of milestone schedules and make-ready look-ahead schedules so that you know where you're going. And you bring all parties in and you make sure everybody's on track. You not only feel a little better about your schedule, but you also feel a little better about risk, that you might be eliminating it or reducing it down to a manageable amount. And so I think that I'm kicking this back to Laurie for the next topic.
Yes, thank you so much, Sid. And for anyone who may have joined us midstream, we've talked about project schedule uncertainty as well as sharing risk. And we're now moving into our final topic, which is who owns float time. And Todd, could you get us started with this one?
You know, I do take a fairly simplistic view of this. I look at it from a standpoint of I have two types of contracts, and of course there's a whole spectrum. At one end I have the fixed price contract, and at the other end I have time and materials. On fixed price, the supplier owns the schedule. The supplier owns everything. They're the ones who have to deliver to a certain time, and if they don't deliver to a certain time, then they're left holding the bag. Excuse me, if the customer actually delays and causes some sort of problem where the supplier has to slip because of customer delays, the customer has to pay for that. Otherwise, everything belongs into the supplier's court. So if I talk about how we go across that entire spectrum and move down to the other end, I could spend forever, but at the other end of that spectrum, what we see time and materials. And time and materials, the customer ends up owning everything. They're the ones who are holding the bag. The supplier really has very little risk in that arena, and don't have a huge amount of concern to talk about or start pushing back and trying to recoup things because they're not the ones holding the bag. So Sid, what do you think about this?
Well, I think that first of all, you got to find out who needs the float and why do you need it. What's a reasonable amount of time to be allocated to float? If float is like a bone that sticks in the throat of any of the parties, then maybe there's another way around it. How about consider granting me, I'm talking as a contractor, excusable delays. And we'll spell out the reason that excusable delays can be used. There are basically three types of delays: excusable delays, non-compensable delays, and delays in which both parties are at fault, so no one gets any relief. But excusable delays, put them in the contract. Put the reasons why they can be used, why they can be tapped. I think there are also times when a client's demands are so rigid that the risk may not be worth the reward. And there are times when I know I have stepped away from a contract because I thought my ability to deliver and my company's reputation was at stake, and I think I'd rather turn this down and move on to something else. So that's something else that you might want to consider. And I think I'm going back to Tom now.
Thank you, Sid. So one of the things that we've talked about here is that the ability that we have to own float, control risk on our project is really about the agreement that we have between the parties, the performing party and the customer. We can use this to distribute the risk and make it visible. And if it is visible, then that's one of the things we use to share risk. Many projects, though, I'll go to the next slide, for many projects, it isn't really visible to the customer. We can bid the job so that there is no real visibility of any float that exists at the end of the overall project as it's planned. So we bid the project, we put a deadline in place, we put a plan in place to do the work that allows us to complete that work within the envelope that we've established for the project, and leaving us enough time to deal with risk and to make a profit and have it be a successful project at the end. So when it's embedded in the plans and not shared, then it really is owned entirely by the performing organization, and we control that. But that isn't always the case. Sometimes the plans that we have are visible to the people we're working for, and when that's the case, then we need to ensure that the contract terms that are in place provide us compensation as the people doing the work for giving up that level of control. So we need financial incentives. We talked earlier about incentives and penalties. We talked a little bit about proportionate dealing with any variance that we see on the project. And in those cases, building that explicitly into the contract allows us to share the risk. So the reason why we need to treat these cases a little bit differently is pretty obvious. It's whether we own all the risk or whether we have shared the risk through the terms that we've taken on the project with the others that are around us. And I'm going to turn it back to Todd to wrap up the topic.
Yeah, so to wrap this topic up, and we can fold this thing up before too long, is we get kind of that point of, can we really share float? And that goes right back to, can we really share risk? And I feel that it's pretty difficult to do that. People are going to have their sections of float that they're going to be able to work on and be able to use and be able to work with. That being said, there's always the situation where I have to sit down as a supplier with the customer and say, okay, we have a problem here. How are we going to work this out? Because we want to come to some sort of an amenable agreement, because if we don't, then we end up in litigation. And our real goal is to stay away from litigation. The minute we do that, there really are no winners. Excuse me, the people who would win in a litigation case are really just the lawyers, and that doesn't progress us any further. It doesn't get our system out in front of people, and in many cases it doesn't even make us feel any better that we've achieved anything through some sort of a lawsuit. The biggest defense we have to avoid the confusion and possible litigation is really a solid change control or change management process, depending on what you call it. It's that ability to go out and document, this is what I have, this is what's changed, and make sure that everybody understands that. That communication back out to make sure that I know that you've pushed things out this far. I can absorb part of that, but me absorbing part of that, it may not be direct cost, but that was part of my reserve that I had in here that I'm now using. So you kind of owe me some reserve here out in the future. So being able to actually track that and move down that route better is really, to me, very critical. And so I put a change management, change control process in place, a pretty draconian one, to make sure things work. And that's really it. Lori, what do we have for conclusions?
Why don't we start with Sid, going over some of the key takeaway points for today that we can all keep top of mind.
I think in all of the topics that we have discussed today, there are two terms that I think apply. One is collaboration. Don't operate in a vacuum. The term team building is sometimes overused and sometimes is just a trite expression. But the true meaning of building a team in any project where you bring all participants in, you have their input, you discuss the problems, you discuss the progress, and you get everybody to participate and learn about everybody else's concerns and problems and bring them to the fore and solve them in a collaborative fashion is really the key, to, I think, to success for any project, whether you're building a building or whether you are constructing a gas refinery. And the second point is give and take, and reasonableness should always be considered when you're engaged in hard bargaining. And I've always felt that a successful negotiation is when both parties leave unhappy. Then you've created a good bargain. So those are my thoughts.
All right, thank you, Sid. And how about you, Tom?
Thank you, Laurie. I think both parties need to leave equivalently unhappy, but that's part of this. So a couple things. If we are going to be doing contracts and we're going to be doing projects on a fee-for-service basis, one of the goals that any of us have in bidding the work and making the commitment is that we do understand the risks and the uncertainties in the work, the external dependencies, the estimates for work for which we really don't have a lot of experience, and there's always at least some of that in the project work we take on. Those things that sometimes take less time and sometimes take more, really think hard about that, and then build that into the overall package that we're offering when we do sign a contract, so that we have some chance of from a schedule risk standpoint, ending the project before the committed date that we've written down. And then as well, to really ask the question, how do we share risk? And put that in the contract so that we have terms in there so that if the reserve that we've built into the overall project plan is visible, the consequences of using less of that are beneficial to us running the project. The consequences of using more than that are detrimental, and the penalties that are built in, so that it's very visible and that there are appropriate terms in place for the contract and for the project as a whole. And again, working as a team, working closely with the customer organization so that everybody has some skin in the game. And I think the last point here is Todd's.
Yes, over to you, Todd.
So I would, I don't know if I can upstage the 4 points of my other participants here, that really key issues there that we need to address. Lastly, I think I just need to throw in that change management, that we have to document what's going on. It's back to the contract. The change management is the extension of the contract, and any time there's something that differs and things move around, we need to document that and make sure that people are fully aware of what's going on in a very collaborative environment. So that would be my last one there. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And with that, let's go to our final poll for today to get a read on what next steps our participants are planning on taking. So, folks, coming up on your screen is that last poll, and we'd like to hear from you. Based on today's discussion, what are some of the strategies that you plan to incorporate into your own management of projects? And in this case, you can select more than one, so please do select all that apply. Okay, looks like just about everybody has voted, so let's take a quick look at those results. Looks like almost a tie between more effort aimed at managing risk and uncertainty and better collaboration and teamwork with project participation. And so, well, thank you very much for that input. I think it's quite interesting. Why don't we go ahead and ask all three of our speakers to come up to the virtual podium, and we'll start with our first question. And this one is for you, Todd. And apologies if I'm messing up your name. Paravi would like to know, Todd, what are some of the things you do to build trust with the team?
Well, as I mentioned, whenever I was talking about trust and getting onto a project, I start that from day zero. And the minute I walk on to a project, that is what I have to build almost immediately. I've got a fairly disastrous situation on my hands, and people are pointing fingers and people are blaming one another. So the first thing I do is I assure the team through action, not just through words. There's the words that go out that say, hey, I'm here to take the bullet. I need to know what's going on. I need to know how to solve this thing. You guys have all those answers. I need to have that so I can move forward and shield you. And that, the opportunity to shield someone from the bullets coming in from the outside, and arrows from the woods, and those sorts of things, is pretty quick. Usually somebody starts immediately saying, hey, so-and-so did something wrong, and I step in the middle of it and just stop it and say, no, the buck stops here. You're going to talk to me about that. Don't go trying to bash the team here. And so that's really where it starts, trying to get people what they need. I've been on situations where people have extremely slow computers. Nobody's going to break the funds loose to be able to get their workstations actually working fast enough so they can get something done. And I get them new computers, and that's part of what I can do generally. I just do a cost justification for it really quick and say, that's what I need. So it's usually through action. I shy away from team building events of falling over backwards or going out to lunch and all that sort of thing. I do it through action. And those are the two things that I do right away. Take the bullet and find out something that's going to make somebody's life easier and solve it right then and there.
So, Todd,
You're right on
really
target.
good advice.
Right on target. Action's not
why don't we have go ahead and have Sid, and then Tom, if you want to comment. Sid?
Yeah, I think you're right. Action's not words. And you've got to do this to build respect in yourself and your customer, and confidence that when an action needs to take place, you're there to do it, and you're there to do it right. And it just takes a few of those instances where you build the kind of respect that you need in order to manage a project.
Tom, did you want to add?
Just very quickly, one of the things that Sid said early on was, walk a mile in their shoes. And part of this, building trust, is about getting into discussions, starting with the initial discussions around the contract, and using the basic principles of principal negotiation, the Getting to Yes book that we probably all have a copy of, is about not taking positions. It's about seeing things from everybody's perspective and making it very clear that we're in this together, so that we're not adversaries. We become partners and teammates in going forward with this. That's easier said than done, but it's always the goal that you have to go into a project, particularly a big, complex project with a lot of risk.
I second that.
All right. This one for you, Sid, and Tim is asking, how do you think building information modeling, BIM, has changed the design construct industry?
The biggest problem before BIM was something called conflicts, where the mechanical designers are doing their thing, the structural designers are doing their thing, and the drawings get put together and the contract set that goes out to bidders, and they've either not been reviewed or properly coordinated, which is why a coordination process is always in the specifications. There are conflicts. A 6-inch fire line is going to bump into a 24-inch deep beam. And a lot of times you don't know this until you're in the field faced with the situation. With BIM, all of these conflicts are virtually eliminated, because as the three-dimensional process of the structure goes to the various other engineering disciplines, they see what tolerances they have, both horizontally and vertically, so that everything will fit in the space that the architect wants it to fit into. So that's what I think the greatest advance in BIM. Cuts down on change orders, cuts down on a lot of arguments because of conflicts that would occur in the field. And by conflicts, I mean conflicts of one system conflicting with the space that's occupied by another system.
Okay, this next one, let's throw over to to Tom, and Loic is asking, considering student syndrome when developing the project plan, is there a better way to behave?
Well, we first have to discuss student syndrome, and the theory is that nobody starts work until the last minute. And we touched on this very briefly at the very beginning of the talk. We talked a little bit about traditional float, where an activity in the project plan has some flexibility. It has an early schedule and it has a late schedule, and anywhere in that range, it's okay to do the work without affecting the overall deadline for the project. A good project leader, I think, does a lot to ensure that the work is done as early as it can be done. Todd talked about bringing risks forward. And so part of it is about discussing. It's about the project leader going one-on-one with all the people who are contributing to the work and ensuring that when work can begin, it is begun. Those of us that have been around projects for a long time realize that risk happens where you least expect it. And those things about our project plan that are very cool-looking blue bars with lots of flexibility, those are quite likely to be the things that cause the project to be delayed or to cost more or other kinds of problems. And so part of it is just basically reinforcing what we talked about with the first question here about trust. It is that as we take on projects, as we really expect to perform properly and be successful at the end,
It's about focusing on getting all the work that we've planned visible and beginning that work as soon as we can and doing everything humanly possible as project leaders to stay on plan. And so people do have a tendency to say, well, it's not due yet, I'm not going to work on it yet. But that's one of the formulas for projects that don't perform well and do have major project schedule problems toward the end. As they say with a baseball season, it's over 160 games, and the ones at the beginning will hurt your standing just as badly as the ones at the end. So you've got to focus on the entire range of work within the project, even those things for which the student syndrome might seem to not be a problem, because it well could be.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. And let's go over to Todd. And we've got a question here from Melanie. And Todd, you talk about time and materials and fixed price contracts as being the only style of contract there is. Those are the simple cases. Why not talk about the more complex ones?
Yeah, you can always have more complex situations in there. There's millions of different types of cost plus and various variance type things that you can do. We're limited by time. We could probably spend a 2-hour seminar just talking about the different types of contracts and how they work. There's always a way you can break this down. So I quite often will take even a fixed price contract and I'll cut it into sections and try to figure out how I'm going to run this section, how I'm going to run that section. I'll even throw different methodologies at it to make it work. And I'm not sure if we can really completely address that in here. It is a big issue. Just a little note here back on the student syndrome thing that I think needs to be brought up. There's a lot in handling student syndrome that has to be done through some simple leadership skills and getting people who are managing projects and getting away from being managers of projects and being leaders of projects is really a huge thing. And I think that helps in many of these cases when we're trying to figure out how to solve a problem and coming to an agreeable solution. On the student syndrome, it's a big issue for me. I tend to try to cut everybody's time down, get away from the point of you have to get it done in the allotted time. Somebody says a week. If they get it done in 3 days, if they get it done in 8 days, I don't care. I'm not going to yell at them for that. I want to make sure that I get some sort of estimates that keep people under pressure. And I usually keep a high degree of pressure on the project and on the people. That tends to take away the student syndrome. The student syndrome means I wait until I get under pressure. So if I apply the pressure first, then I don't have to wait for the student syndrome. So hopefully a good enough answer on the first question, and then excuse me for monopolizing over on
I can just add. Yeah, I can just add one thing. And I think I look at 3 basic types of contracts, maybe 4. One is lump sum or stipulated sum. One is a cost plus a fee. Another is a cost plus a fee with a guaranteed maximum price. And the other is construction management, where the contractor acts as the owner's agent and not as a third-party participant. So that would be my take on types of contracts.
All right. And John, I think this is going to be the last question that we air, and could be good for Todd or Sid, but we'll start with Todd. It says, Todd, you and Sid have mentioned a methodology that integrates the customer and the supplier, agile and design build respectively. Without having a design for what you're building, how do you know your supplier is going to build what you want for the best price?
You want to go first, Todd?
I can do it, sure. I think we're going to have the same answer.
I think we are.
That is, you're not going to end up really with a solid guarantee that that's the case, that they are going to end up with exactly what you want to build. I think that in Sid's case, he's going to have a slightly different answer there, but in my case, a new product development, where I would be using that, or in IT, what we're really trying to do in that very close working relationship is to make sure we really understand what the customer wants. And quite often we find the customer doesn't know what they want. So we morph the project to try to get to where the customer really really needs to be. And I have a little cute line that the customer always knows what they want. They don't necessarily know what they need. And so we're putting in a methodology that drives them away over to what they really do need. And that's where we have to sit shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow, working through the problems day by day. And I don't know how you can do that in any other situation than having some sort of a collaborative effort. Sid?
My answer is very clear. One of the disadvantages of the design build is the customer must know exactly what he wants. So when he sits down with the designers, he can tell the designers exactly what his needs are and exactly how he wants them addressed. And if he doesn't know that, design build is not the place to be.
Yep, agreed.
Well, thank you, three gentlemen, and we're just going to go through a few ways that you can consider, that you can continue the conversation. If your question was not answered today on air, we'll certainly be getting back to you with that. But please do come out to Facebook and facebook.com/novel. You can like the fan page or look for the post about the Float webinar. Again, on Twitter, the hashtag #KWebinar. Certainly invite you to learn more about Novel at novel.com and Amacom at amacombooks.org, as well as Elsevier at elsevier.com. Before we sign off, though, I would like to thank each of you for joining us and trust that you found today to be of value. Of course, special thanks to Sid, Todd, and Tom, as well as our sponsors Novel, Amacom, and Elsevier. Folks, you will be receiving a short survey at the end of the webinar. We would appreciate your taking a moment to fill it out. Also, would like to thank our logistics producer, Patty Van Hooser, for all of her behind-the-scenes collaboration and support. Again, a copy of today's webcast will be available for download, and you'll receive it in the way of a link via email early next week. And most importantly, thank you for joining us. And as your moderator, this is Lori Dearman saying have a great rest of the week. Bye for now.